Oftentimes, when we look at the story of David and Bathsheba, it is read and it is often preached as a love story between a man and a woman. And this love between this man and a woman produces one of the great family lineages that goes all the way up to Jesus. That the child Solomon, being the wisest man in the world, was produced from this holy union. But when this story is told from Bathsheba's point of view and not the patriarchal view of the Bible, then the story looks a little bit different. The story no longer is a love story, is no longer a family oriented story, but becomes a story of a woman who goes through so much trauma but has to hide it because she fears for her life and the life of her children. So let's take a look at the David and Bathsheba story, but from Bathsheba's point of view. So Bathsheba was a woman who was married to Uriah the Hittite. The love of their relationship is not known, but undoubtedly, while her husband was out fighting a war for the kingdom by which they lived in, she knew that her husband, being an honorable man, was fighting for the good of their nation. And one night, just as any other night, that she would find herself on her rooftop bathing, as most people of that era and that time frame, the way Israelite houses were built, that the rooftop served as a place to bathe and a place to cook. So she was not doing anything out of the ordinary, bathing in the moonlight as she normally does, thinking about what's going on with her husband and hoping that he has a safe return from battle. Unbeknownst to her, there was a peeping Tom just a short distance away. That peeping Tom happened to be the king of Israel at that time frame. And after taking her bath and cleaning herself and getting back dressed, there's a knock at the door. Her presence is requested at the king's palace. You can imagine that as she was going on her way to the king's palace, all types of thoughts went through her mind. Is there news about her husband? Did the campaign end and he die? Because why else would the king be calling me to his palace? David is supposed to be known as a man after God's own heart, a true fervent believer in the God Yahweh. So this must be bad news about my husband Uriah. So as she travels there and gets there and faces the king, gives him all the normal patronage, but she has to wonder, I wasn't taken to the throne room, and yet I was taken to his bedroom. Now it is very well known that the king has all the wives and concubines of Saul, and many other wives and concubines as well. What could he possibly want of me in his bedroom? Is he about to propose the king's right to take advantage of any woman that he chooses and desires? But who am I? I am a woman that is living in a kingdom and a time frame when a woman doesn't have agency of her own self, that a woman cannot deny the king any of his pleasures. So the king sashays in, tells her that I saw you bathing in the moonlight, and I think that your poom poom and your tatas look real good. So he takes advantage of her. Imagine being Bathsheba, lying there, having to go through the motions, having to feign pleasure to please the king, because certainly if you do not give him pleasure or demonstrate pleasure to him, your life is in jeopardy. And not only your life, the life of your husband. This is the duty of a woman in or around the 10th century BCE. So she's taken advantage of. And when the night is over, she is escorted out and taken back to her home, living in the shame that she knows that she has just participated in an unwilling adultery. We call that being SA'd in our time frame today, molested and sexually assaulted. A few months later, she realizes that she has missed her cycle. Her menstrual hasn't come. She finds out that she's pregnant. And somehow word gets back to the king that she's now pregnant with the king's child because Uriah has yet to return home. Not knowing whether she would live or whether she would die, she sits at home, contemplating what her options are. Her husband returns home. He will accuse her of committing adultery. And based on the laws of that time frame, because she got pregnant while he was away, she certainly would be stoned to death. If she tells them that the king forced me into his bedchambers, she's a woman. Her testimony carries no weight. But to her surprise, the next thing she knows, she's been summoned back to the castle, back to the king. Maybe this is the end of her life. Maybe her death is coming. But when she gets there, what does she find out? That a previous scenario had played out that she was unaware of at the entire time. That her husband was returned home, that her husband was told to go and lie with his wife. But he never came because he was an honorable man who didn't believe that if his troops could not come home and be with their wives, then he should not be with his wife. And that her husband had then been sent back to war. And then he was killed. He was murdered. So now, in fear of the king who had plotted to such a degree that he had committed murder, how much value would then be in her life? How much value would her life have? So now she's in fear of her life and the life of her unborn child. But to her surprise, the king says he's now going to marry her and make her his wife. And to the regular population, they may think that, oh, Uriah died. She's a widow. The king is doing a good thing by taking her in and making her his wife, even though she's a pregnant woman. There's rumors going around. How did she get pregnant? Why would David take her in? Who did she commit this adultery with? Until one prophet comes in and says that we know, God knows that y'all committed adultery. You, Bathsheba, it was forced. It was being essayed. But now this prophet is telling the story, letting people know that she's a partaker of adultery. And being a woman, it doesn't matter if it was done by force or through willingness. Because she was in the city and did not scream, she is held accountable to the death penalty. Because that's what Levitical law says. That if a woman who is betrothed to a man or married to a man and she does not scream and she's in the city, then she is guilty of adultery. She doesn't have a leg to stand on. But to her surprise, David marries her, proclaims that the child is his. Of course, he's the king. So him being the king, who's going to go against what he says and claim that this woman should be stoned to death? No. So instead, she gives birth to the child. No one can take away the connection mothers have with a child that they have carried. The child is born sick of what ailment we do not know. But imagine her surprise and her shame and her guilt when she sees that this baby is born sick. Of course, she more than likely, as many women who go through these types of situations, they blame themselves and they blame their own body. And in their era of time, she would have blamed the sin that she had committed, and the baby is suffering because of her sin. And after about 7 or 8 days, her first child, a male, dies. And we know the value of a male child gives the woman more value. And that child dies. She has a little bit of time to mourn, but then realizes that she now must continue to make love to and then produce a son by the very man that essayed her, by the very man that had her husband murdered. And she has to smile and celebrate. She has to show fidelity towards this so-called king who is walking around claiming to have the heart of God. The amount of trauma that Bathsheba would have been going through this whole episode demonstrates just how the Bible does not care about women, does not care about the effects that these stories have on women. Yet women are the greatest followers of this book. Ladies, stop looking at this book from a male's perspective, from the patriarchy. Look at this book for what the reality of what it really is. It is a horrible book that does not like women. So like, share, and subscribe. And always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself because your greatness is non-negotiable. the journey